Hi everyone, my name is Brandon Liu, and today I will be presenting my course presentation on how globalization has facilitated South Korea's impact on the world, economically, politically, and culturally. So let's go ahead and get started. The Korean Wave, Pinpointing South Korea's Multidimensional Global Impacts by Brandon Liu. So for my presentation, I chose option 2, explain how globalization has facilitated South Korea's impacts on the world economically, politically, and culturally. I will be exploring all three variables today. So before we get started, I do want to go over a brief overview of South Korea. South Korea is formerly known as the Republic of Korea. It's situated in the East Asia region, and it borders North Korea, the Yellow Sea, and the Sea of Japan. It has a population of 51.74 million people, so quite a bit for such a tiny country. And its type of government is a presidential democracy, a multi-party system, and this is something that South Korea has evolved into over time through lots of political reform, especially following the Korean War. And over time, as we'll explore in terms of its economic recovery, South Korea is a top industrialized country in the world with top industries including technology, automobiles, and telecommunications. So before we dive into the dimensions of impact, I want to go over the context for South Korea's political and economic recovery in the post-Korean War era. So how did South Korea rebound so quickly? So following the Korean War, South Korea heavily invested in education. Investing in young people and helping them find good jobs was a priority for the government. After foreign aid subsided to help them recover from the war, the Economic Planning Board was founded by the Korean government, and this worked to balance the budget and attract foreign capital. The 5-year economic plan was later announced in 1962, and these both together tried to encourage South Korea to develop their own infrastructure and recover economically. And the government also invested in steel, coal, and other industrial sectors. And this took place through what's known as the Integrated Steel Mill Project of 1973. The new community movement of the 1970s also wanted to modernize the country, specifically its rural communities. And calls for democracy and free market economies propelled the economy in the post-Korean War era as exports and the global national product rose as a result of these calls, as we'll see in just a little bit. And Korea also joined the WTO and the OECD, so the World Trade Organization and the United Nations Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in 1996. And corporate restructuring following the Asian financial crisis, so this is a separate financial crisis, separate from the Korean War. South Korea was able to fully pay off their International Monetary Fund loan by 2004. So all of these factors prove that the South Korean government and the people were very resilient. They were able to make their mark in particularly the semiconductor industry and other technological industries, and also the steel industry as seen. And these factors, along with modernizing rural communities and attracting foreign capital, balancing the budget, all of these were economic strategies that South Korea took to revamp their economy quickly. Global impacts. So today we'll take a look at economic, political, and the cultural dimensions of these impacts. So economic. How has globalization facilitated or influenced South Korea's global economic impact? So these are some pictures. The economic dimension. So in my presentation today, I'd like to have us think about how the interactions with international economic organizations have led to South Korea's economy. So as a result of the world economy increasingly becoming more globalized, all of these factors have allowed South Korea to recover, and not only recover, but create an economic impact for the world. And so that's my main focus for these next few slides. So the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank loaned $58 billion in economic aid to South Korea. And they helped to jumpstart South Korea's recovery post-Asian financial crisis. So this recovery in foreign aid came after the Asian financial crisis. And South Korea also joined the WTO, or the World Trade Organization, in 1995. And so by joining the World Trade Organization, South Korea was encouraged to diversify their exports to meet the needs of the world. And through this, South Korea has since become a global player in global trade, as these free market economies are continuously developing. Next, the Sagewa globalization policy of the 1990s further opened up the South Korean economy to global trade. It loosened restrictions on international finance and overseas investments, and it allowed chaebol, or family-owned businesses, to apply for foreign loans directly from international firms. And this is according to a thesis from the San Francisco State University, Cal State SF, in 2015. So essentially, as South Korea has become more integrated in the world economy and has received these international finance and overseas investments, their local businesses, not just the national business, the national economy, but their local businesses have also thrived as well. And all of these factors have contributed to South Korea's economic growth and therefore their impact on the world, which we will see on this next slide. So South Korea has become focused. So following their economic recovery, they have become focused on the export-oriented economic model. And this focuses on tariff-free imports and easy access to bank loans. And this is according to the Social Scientist Journal from 1985. Also, along with this model comes lower lower income taxes that have allowed investors to fund export production. So by incentivizing investors with lower income taxes, it has contributed to greater export production, as seen in South Korea. And tax and tariff reductions for overseas marketing and exports have since taken place as well, again reflective of this export-oriented economic model to give goods to the world. The Korea Development Bank has also funded 50% of all export industries, including funding for infrastructure projects, advising companies on restructuring their businesses, and facilitating investment banking services and foreign investments. So South Korea has become increasingly focused on this export-oriented model. They have become increasingly integrated in the global economy because they are able to create this infrastructure to manage these exports and deliver some of these things. So in this final bullet point, this creates more of a tangible focus for what has actually happened. So the global market has created opportunities for South Korea to share their technological intellectual property, or IP. Samsung has since become the world's largest chip maker, and part of what differentiates themselves from companies like Apple is that they produce most of their materials that go into the smartphone. So this streamlines the manufacturing process and gets rid of the middlemen and trying to outsource their different materials needed for their goods. And this, again, gives them a competitive advantage against companies like Apple. So as we can see, the strategies that South Korea has been taking economically, driven by globalization and those trends, and by integrating themselves in the global economy, South Korea has been able to focus on exports and deliver economic impacts for the world. Political. So how has globalization influenced South Korea's global political impact? So the political dimension. So the second and third waves of democratization have encouraged South Korea to establish free market economic policies and promote social equality. So as South Korea has been influenced by political factors, global political factors, we have seen how they have intertwined with South Korea's economic growth and prosperity, and therefore influencing their impact on the world, which we will see again in a little bit. So as democratic ideals spread throughout the South Korean government, so did calls for economic independence and social equality. There is greater calls for redistribution of wealth that have since grown, according to the International Journal of Social Welfare, published in 2017. So basically what this is saying is that as South Korea has become more democratic, there have been greater calls for economic independence and social equality among individuals within the economy. According to the according to the Copenhagen Journal of Asian Studies, published in 1989, the demands for democracy of the 1980s constituted efforts to resynchronize the Korean value structure with its division of labor and to overcome the injustice and unfairness Koreans felt in the 1980s. So over time, democracy has again contributed to these economic reforms and the focus on the individual and promoting social equality that have been seen in South Korea. And these trends have been influenced by political globalization. This idea of democracy and being spread throughout the world, kind of like the Western model for democracy. And free market policies, again, espoused by the West, have enabled South Korea to become a global economic leading power. And calls for socioeconomic reform have coalesced with calls for reform in other East and Southeast Asian countries. So essentially, South Korea has partnered with other Asian countries, both economically and politically. So we can kind of see those globalization dimensions there, again, strengthening their impact for these economic changes. So after integrating itself in the international political and economic arena, South Korea has become a stronger player on the global stage. We can see this through the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals. South Korea's commitment to the 2030 SDGs has resulted in rapid economic growth, significant reductions in poverty, and growth of the knowledge economy, not only within South Korea, but in East Asia as a whole. So this is a perfect example of how globalization has facilitated South Korea's impact politically, and not just politically, but also socially and economically. Furthermore, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, is a mutual economic and political cooperation between member states and has allowed states such as South Korea to expedite their trade in international business through faster customs procedures, universal trade regulations, and standards. So these increasing political relationships that South Korea has built on the global level, specifically in the Asia-Pacific region, have allowed them to create greater economic impact. So you kind of see how these political economic factors are intertwined. And then strictly focusing on the political scene, in contrast with North Korea's isolationist policy, South Korea's voice on the political stage has been amplified. We can see this through their top allies, including the United States, Europe, and Japan. So South Korea is a key negotiator in many situations. Finally, we look at some cultural impacts. How has globalization influenced South Korea's global cultural impact? The cultural dimension. So first, I'd like to focus on the globalization of music. So many of you well know about the widespread popularity of K-pop groups, including BTS and Blackpink. Specifically, this has been driven by their shift to digital-based marketing and diffusion via the internet. So diffusion of music and also diffusion of marketing. And has also been driven by their inclusion of English in their songs, so making it more culturally accessible, and their classy, on-trend style, according to the Journal of International Business and Economy, published in 2020. And this globalization of music, so globalization has facilitated these impacts, has resulted in South Korea's global cultural impact on the world. And we see this through impacts on global cultural norms, from K-pop becoming mainstream and how it has ignited and repopularized youth empowerment and nonviolence efforts, specifically espoused by BTS and other groups, and it has strengthened calls for Asian diversity and inclusion. Furthermore, the globalization of on-screen entertainment. So we see this through the international diffusion of K-dramas and Korean-produced shows and films such as Parasite and Squid Game. This is driven by its predictability, its originality, and the Korean twist of respect to elders and family values, along with hyper-modern and a glitzy background, twists, and dark humor, according to Stanford News in 2021. And again, these factors, supported by globalization, have caused South Korea to create a global cultural impact, impacting heightened intrigue into Korean pop culture, literature, film, history, and politics, again, according to Stanford News, published in 2021. We also see the globalization of the cosmetics industry, global consumerism, and the desire for K-beauty products has since rapidly increased. This is driven by the idolization of the glass skin look, the promotion by K-pop groups, and the desire for an alternative to Western skincare products. And again, this global supply chain, this global market, this global consumerism has allowed these trends to develop. And South Korea's global cultural impact is seen in this way through social media influencers around the world promoting K-beauty products, not just Korean people, but people of all different ethnicities and races. Also, there's been an emphasis on natural and clean, high-quality skincare around the world ever since. So another global cultural impact. So final analysis. What factors have contributed to the distinguishable rise of Korea? So globalization has facilitated South Korea's impact on the world economically, politically, and culturally. We see their economic impact driven by globalization, their impact seen through the export-oriented model, and their investments in knowledge economy and comparative advantage, or technological niches. And we see this success in distributing goods for the world through companies like Samsung. And politically, so international partnerships have strengthened South Korea's role in the world through a political and economic lens. So we see that through the United Nations and APEC. We see how this political globalization has allowed South Korea's economy to thrive in the global market, and has also allowed them to create a greater global political impact and having a greater voice in the political arena. And finally, culturally, the global diffusion of Korean music, media, and beauty products via the internet and global supply chain have made Korean culture a mainstream cultural norm. So we see that globalization has allowed these different aspects of Korean culture to diffuse around the world, and South Korea has created a global phenomenon and a global cultural impact through these things, making it a mainstream cultural norm. Finally, I'd like to go over my works cited. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my video and learned a lot. Thank you so much.